My son-in-law offered me a ride. Mother-in-law, let's go for a drive. Halfway there, 3 men were waiting for us in a secluded place. I thought I was going to die, but what happened next changed hundreds of lives forever. Listen to my story until the end, and comment from which city you are watching me. That way, I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, and I am 73 years old. Everything started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in late October. The autumn leaves were painting the world in shades of amber and crimson, and I was tending to my small garden when my son-in-law, Derek, appeared at my front door with that peculiar smile of his that never quite reached his eyes. "Mother-in-law, let me take you for a drive," he said, his voice carrying an unusual enthusiasm that immediately put me on edge. Derek had never been particularly attentive to me in the 5 years he had been married to my daughter Sarah. He was the type of man who spoke in clipped sentences and avoided eye contact, always seeming to harbor some unspoken resentment. I wiped the dirt from my hands on my gardening apron and studied his face carefully. There was something different about him today, something that made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. His usually perfectly styled brown hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his grey eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "That's very kind of you, Derek, but I have quite a bit to do around the house today," I replied, hoping to politely decline his unexpected invitation. The truth was, I had never felt entirely comfortable around him. There was always an undercurrent of tension whenever we were in the same room, as if he were constantly evaluating me and finding me wanting. "I insist," he said, his smile becoming more pronounced, but somehow less genuine. "Sarah mentioned that you've been cooped up in the house too much lately. A little fresh air would do you good." I found it odd that Sarah would have said such a thing, considering she had visited just 3 days prior and had made no mention of my supposed isolation. In fact, I maintained quite an active social life with my book club, church activities, and weekly volunteer work at the local animal shelter. But Derek seemed determined, and I didn't want to cause any family discord by being difficult. "Well, I suppose a short drive wouldn't hurt," I conceded, though every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to decline and retreat into the safety of my home. Derek's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. "Wonderful. Let me help you get your coat." As I gathered my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. I had survived 73 years on this earth by trusting my intuition, and right now, that intuition was telling me that something was very wrong with this entire situation. But I pushed those thoughts aside, chiding myself for being a paranoid old woman. Derek's car was a sleek black sedan that I had never seen before. I mentioned this as he helped me into the passenger seat, and he explained that it was a rental, that his usual car was in the shop for repairs. The explanation seemed reasonable enough, but I noticed that his hands were trembling slightly as he started the engine. For the first 20 minutes of our drive, Derek made small talk about the weather and asked perfunctory questions about my health. His responses to my answers seemed rehearsed, as if he were going through the motions of polite conversation while his mind was occupied with other matters entirely. It was when we turned off the main highway onto a narrow, winding road that I began to feel truly alarmed. The trees grew denser on either side of us, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the afternoon sunlight into strange, shifting patterns. I'd lived in this area for over 40 years, and I didn't recognize this particular route. "Where are we going, Derek?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. "It's a surprise," he replied, but there was something cold in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. The road continued to narrow, eventually becoming little more than a dirt path surrounded by thick woodland. I could feel my heart beginning to race, and I found myself gripping the door handle so tightly that my arthritis began to flare up in protest. "Derek, I think we should turn around," I said, no longer bothering to hide the anxiety in my voice. "This doesn't seem like a suitable place for an elderly woman to be walking around." "We're almost there," he said, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. Just a few more minutes. The car bounced and jolted over the uneven terrain, and I had to brace myself against the dashboard to avoid being thrown around in my seat. Through the windshield, I could see that the path was leading to a small clearing up ahead, and my blood ran cold when I spotted 3 figures standing in the shadows at the edge of the open space. Derek brought the car to a stop, and I could hear the engine ticking as it cooled in the sudden silence. The 3 men began walking toward us, and even through the tinted windows, I could see that they were rough-looking individuals. The tallest of them had a shaved head covered in tattoos, and he was wearing a leather jacket despite the mild weather. The second man was shorter but stockier, with long, greasy hair and several visible piercings. The third was lean and wiry, with the kind of pale, hollow-cheeked appearance that spoke of a hard life lived in the shadows. "Derek," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "who are these people?" He turned to look at me, and for the first time since I had known him, his mask of polite civility completely slipped away. The expression on his face was one of cold calculation, mixed with something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he said, and for a moment I almost believed that he meant it. "But I don't have a choice." The tall man with the tattoos rapped his knuckles against Derek's window, and my son-in-law rolled it down with obvious reluctance. "Everything ready?" the man asked, his voice gravelly and intimidating. "Yes," Derek replied, though he wouldn't meet the man's eyes. "She's here, just like we agreed." A wave of terror washed over me as I realized what was happening. I had read about such things in the newspapers, elderly people being targeted for various criminal schemes. My mind raced through the possibilities: kidnapping for ransom, robbery, or worse. I thought of Sarah, of how devastated she would be to discover her husband's involvement in whatever this was. The stocky man with the piercings walked around to my side of the car and opened the door. "Come on, Grandma," he said with a sneer. "Time to get out." I remained firmly seated, clutching my purse to my chest. "I'm not going anywhere with you people." The man's expression darkened, and he reached for my arm, but before he could touch me, the lean man called out from behind him. "Wait," he said, stepping closer. "Let me handle this." There was something familiar about his voice, something that tugged at the edges of my memory. When he moved into the light, I could see his face more clearly, and I gasped in recognition. "Tommy," I whispered, scarcely able to believe what I was seeing. Thomas Murphy had been my neighbor's son, a troubled teenager who had spent most of his youth getting into minor scrapes with the law. I hadn't seen him in over 15 years, not since his mother had moved away in shame after his 3rd arrest. He had been a sweet child once, before his father's abandonment and his mother's struggles with addiction had set him on a darker path. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," he said, and I could see genuine surprise in his eyes. "I didn't know it was going to be you." "What's going on here, Tommy?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect that I already knew. The tattooed man looked confused and irritated. "You two know each other." "She was my neighbor when I was a kid," Tommy explained. "She used to give me cookies and help me with my homework when my mom was indisposed." I remembered those afternoons well. Tommy would appear at my back door, usually around dinner time, with that hungry look that spoke of more than just physical need. I would feed him and listen to his problems, and for a few hours he would be just a normal child instead of the angry, neglected boy he was becoming. "This changes things," the stocky man said, spitting into the dirt. "Maybe we should call this off." "No," Derek said quickly, climbing out of the car. "We can't call it off. I need that money, and you promised me it would be quick and clean." "What money?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. "I've gotten myself into some financial trouble, Margaret. These men were hired to convince you to change your will." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Derek knew that I had named Sarah as my primary beneficiary, but he also knew that my will contained provisions that would prevent him from accessing the inheritance if he and Sarah were to divorce, which had been a distinct possibility given their recent marital troubles. "You want to kidnap me to force me to change my will?" I asked, incredulous. Not kidnap, the tattooed man said. Just keep you somewhere safe while you think about the benefits of being more generous to your son-in-law. This is insane, I said, shaking my head. Derek, how could you do this to Sarah? She loves you. Sarah doesn't understand, he replied, his voice taking on a defensive tone. She doesn't know what it's like to have people threatening you, demanding money you don't have. What people? Tommy asked, suddenly interested. Derek shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. I could see the wheels turning in Tommy's head, and I remembered that despite his troubled past, he had always been sharp and perceptive. You're in debt to someone dangerous, aren't you? Tommy continued. Someone who sent us to collect on their behalf. The tattooed man grabbed Derek by the shirt. Is that true? Are you using us to settle your own debts? It's not like that, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I saw my opportunity and took it. Tommy, you know this is wrong. You know I never did anything but try to help you when you were young. Tommy looked conflicted, glancing between his companions and me. Mrs. Thompson, I'm not the same kid you used to know. I've done things. Bad things. I don't believe that, I said firmly. The Tommy I knew had a good heart. He was just lost and needed someone to believe in him. The stocky man was growing impatient. This is taking too long. Let's just grab the old lady and figure out the details later. But Tommy stepped between us. No, she's right. This is wrong. You getting soft, Murphy? The tattooed man asked menacingly. Maybe I am, Tommy replied, his jaw set with determination I remembered from his childhood. But I'm not going to hurt someone who showed me kindness when no one else would. The situation was rapidly deteriorating, and I could see that violence was becoming increasingly likely. Derek was backing away from the group, his face pale with panic, and the two remaining men were squaring off against Tommy. There's something else you should know, I said quickly, hoping to diffuse the tension. Derek, I changed my will last month. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could see Derek's face go white. You did what? He asked. I changed my will, I repeated. Sarah is no longer my primary beneficiary. This was actually true. Following some concerning behavior I had observed in Derek over the past several months, I had consulted with my attorney and made some significant changes to my estate planning. But I hadn't yet told Sarah about the changes, wanting to wait for the right moment. Who did you leave it to? Derek asked, his voice barely audible. The animal shelter where I volunteer, I replied, and several other charities. Sarah will receive a modest sum, but the bulk of my estate will go to organizations that help those who can't help themselves. Derek's legs seemed to give out, and he sat down heavily on a fallen log. The tattooed man was staring at him with undisguised disgust. So you dragged us out here for nothing? He growled. I didn't know, Derek said weakly. She never said anything. This is a waste of time, the stocky man said. Let's just take whatever cash she has and get out of here. But Tommy was shaking his head. No, we're done here. The hell we are, the tattooed man replied, pulling a knife from his jacket. Nobody makes fools out of us. The next few seconds seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tommy lunged forward to block the tattooed man's advance, and the two of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The stocky man started toward me, but I surprised myself by swinging my purse with all the strength I could muster, catching him squarely in the face. The purse was heavier than it appeared, weighted down with the various items that elderly women tend to accumulate: keys, coins, reading glasses, medication bottles, and a small flashlight that my late husband had insisted I carry. The impact was sufficient to stagger my attacker and buy me a few precious seconds. Derek was still sitting on the log, seemingly paralyzed by the chaos unfolding around him. I could see Tommy and the tattooed man rolling around in the dirt, each trying to gain control of the knife. Without thinking, I grabbed a large stick from the ground and brought it down as hard as I could on the tattooed man's wrist. He howled in pain and released the knife, which skittered away into the underbrush. Tommy scrambled to his feet, blood streaming from a cut on his cheek, and kicked the tattooed man in the ribs to keep him down. The stocky man was recovering from my purse assault and advancing on me again, but Tommy intercepted him with a solid right cross that dropped him to his knees. "Run, Mrs. Thompson," Tommy shouted. "Get back to the car." But as I turned toward the sedan, I saw that Derek was no longer there. He had disappeared into the woods, abandoning me to face the consequences of his schemes alone. The car keys were still in the ignition, but I hadn't driven in over 3 years, not since my mild stroke had made my doctor nervous about my reflexes. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures. I climbed into the driver's seat, my arthritic hands shaking as I tried to remember the proper sequence for starting the engine. Behind me I could hear the sounds of continued struggle as Tommy fought to keep the 2 men at bay. The engine roared to life, and I managed to get the car into reverse, backing away from the clearing as quickly as I dared on the narrow, uneven path. Through the rear window I could see Tommy running after me, blood still streaming down his face. "Wait!" he called out. "Take me with you!" I stopped the car, and Tommy dove into the passenger seat just as the tattooed man emerged from the trees, limping but still dangerous looking. "Drive!" Tommy said urgently, and I pressed the accelerator harder than I had intended, causing the car to lurch forward violently. My driving was rusty and erratic, but adrenaline seemed to have sharpened my focus in ways I hadn't experienced in years. We bounced and swayed along the dirt path, tree branches scraping against the windows as we made our escape. "Are you hurt?" I asked Tommy as we reached the paved road. "I'll live," he replied, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding cheek. "What about you? Are you okay?" "I think so," I said, though my hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. "Tommy, why did you help me back there?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the passing landscape. "You remember that Christmas when I was 12, when my mom was in one of her bad phases and forgot to buy me anything?" I remembered. Tommy had shown up at my door on Christmas morning, trying to act like he didn't care, but unable to hide the disappointment in his eyes. I had invited him in for breakfast and given him a present I had originally bought for my nephew, who lived too far away to visit. "You gave me that model airplane kit," Tommy continued. "It was the first real present anyone had ever given me, something that was just for me and not something my mom had grabbed at the last minute from a convenience store. You built that plane," I said, remembering how proud he had been when he brought it to show me weeks later. "I still have it," he admitted. "It's sitting on a shelf in my apartment, right next to the only photo I have of my mom when she was sober." We drove in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of us processing what had just happened. As we approached the main highway, Tommy spoke again. "Mrs. Thompson, what you said back there about changing your will, was that true?" "Yes," I replied. "I've been concerned about Derek for some time. There have been signs that he's been having financial troubles, and I've noticed that he's been pressuring Sarah about money." "You should probably call the police," Tommy said. "What about you?" I asked. "Won't you get in trouble?" He shrugged. "Probably, but it's nothing I can't handle. Besides, those guys back there, they're not going to want to stick around to talk to the cops." Trudy. We had reached the police station before I realized that I had been driving competently for the past 30 minutes, navigating traffic and making turns without any of the hesitation or confusion that had plagued my previous attempts at driving. Inside the station, Tommy and I gave our statements to a detective named Rodriguez, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened carefully to our account of events, asking pointed questions about Derek's behavior and the identity of his accomplices. "We'll need to find your son-in-law," Detective Rodriguez said. "Do you have any idea where he might go?" I thought about Derek's habits and relationships. He wasn't particularly close to his family, and his friends were mostly work colleagues or golf partners, none of whom would likely harbor a fugitive. "There's a cabin," I said suddenly. "He and Sarah went there for their anniversary last year. It belongs to his former boss, but Derek has a key because he sometimes does maintenance work there during the off-season." I provided the address from memory, and Detective Rodriguez dispatched officers to investigate. Tommy was released after giving his statement, and I was surprised to find myself reluctant to see him go. "What will you do now?" I asked him as we stood outside the police station. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been drifting for a long time, getting involved with the wrong people, making bad choices. Maybe it's time to try something different." I made a decision that surprised even myself. "Tommy, I could use some help around my house and garden. The work isn't difficult, but it's getting harder for me to manage on my own. The pay wouldn't be much, but it would be regular, and it would give you time to figure out what you want to do with your life." He stared at me in amazement. "Mrs. Thompson, after what happened today, you're offering me a job." "You saved my life today," I replied. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Tommy's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I could see the vulnerable child he had once been. "I won't let you down," he said quietly. "I know you won't," I replied, and I meant it. The next few days were a whirlwind of police interviews, family drama, and media attention. Derek was found at the cabin, and he was arrested without incident. It turned out that he had accumulated massive gambling debts and had become involved with some very dangerous people who were demanding payment. Sarah was devastated when she learned of her husband's betrayal, but she was also relieved that I was safe. She filed for divorce immediately and moved back into her childhood bedroom while she figured out her next steps. The two accomplices, whose names were Vincent Caruso and Marcus Webb, were apprehended 2 days later when they tried to rob a convenience store 3 towns over. They were small-time criminals with extensive records, and they readily implicated Derek in exchange for plea deals. Tommy proved to be an excellent worker and companion. He was punctual, reliable, and surprisingly knowledgeable about home maintenance and gardening. More importantly, he was good company, with a dry sense of humor and an intelligence that had been wasted during his years of aimless drifting. One evening, about 2 weeks after the incident, Tommy and I were sitting on my front porch, watching the sunset and enjoying glasses of lemonade. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really change your will? Was it just because you were suspicious of Derek?" I considered how to answer his question. The truth was more complicated than what I had told the police or even Sarah. "Partly," I said, "but there were other reasons too. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what kind of impact I want my life to have had after I'm gone. And you decided that giving money to animal shelters was more important than leaving it to your family?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I realized that true legacy isn't about money. It's about the lives you touch and the difference you make in the world." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you hired me? Because you wanted to make a difference?" "I hired you because you deserved a chance," I said. "But you're right, in a way. I think we all have opportunities to change lives, to be the person who believes in someone when no one else will, like you did for me when I was a kid. Yes, but also like you did for me in those woods. You could have walked away, Tommy. You could have let them take me and collected whatever payment they had promised you, but you chose to do the right thing, even though it was dangerous. I couldn't let them hurt you," he said simply, "and that choice changed both of our lives. Your decision to help me led to you getting this job, which is giving you a chance to build a better future. My decision to trust you again is giving me companionship and assistance in my old age. Neither of us knew how that moment in the woods would turn out, but we both chose to act with courage and compassion." Tommy smiled. "So what you're saying is that legacy is about moments like that? Times when we choose to help someone instead of helping ourselves?" "Exactly. Money comes and goes, but the impact we have on other people's lives can last forever." As if to prove my point, Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She had been coming by every evening since Derek's arrest, partly to check on me and partly to escape the empty house that still contained too many reminders of her failed marriage. "Hi, Mom," she called out as she walked up the front path. "Hello, Tommy." "Good evening, Miss Sarah," Tommy replied, standing politely. Sarah had been initially suspicious of Tommy, given his criminal background and his presence during the traumatic events of that day. But she had gradually warmed to him as she observed his genuine care for me and his obvious efforts to turn his life around. "Any word from your lawyer today?" I asked, as Sarah settled into the third rocking chair that Tommy had retrieved from the basement and repaired. "Yes, actually. Derek's attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal. Apparently he's willing to provide information about the people he was involved with in exchange for a reduced sentence." "That's probably smart," Tommy said. "Those kinds of people don't forgive debts, and they definitely don't forgive people who get them arrested." "Have you decided what you're going to do about the house?" I asked Sarah. "I think I'm going to sell it," she replied. "Too many bad memories, and frankly, I can't afford the mortgage on my salary alone." "You know you can stay here as long as you need to," I reminded her. "I know, Mom, and I appreciate that. But I think it's time for me to figure out how to stand on my own." What about your job?" Tommy asked. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, a career she had always loved, but had sometimes been forced to take a back seat to Derek's demands and expectations. "Actually, that's some good news," Sarah said, her face brightening. "The head of pediatrics offered me a promotion, more responsibility, better pay, and a chance to specialize in the area I've always been most passionate about." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed. "You've always been so good with children." "It would mean some additional training and long hours for the first year," Sarah continued, "but I think it's exactly what I need right now, a chance to rebuild my career and my confidence." We spent the next hour talking about Sarah's career plans, Tommy's progress with his high school equivalency studies, and my own plans for the coming winter. It was a comfortable, easy conversation, the kind that families should have, but too often don't make time for. After Sarah left, Tommy helped me clean up the lemonade glasses and lock up the house for the night. "Mrs. Thompson," he said as we finished our evening routine, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about legacy and making a difference in people's lives." "What about it?" "I want to do more than just yard work and house maintenance. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for this job, and I plan to keep working hard for you, but I want to find ways to help other people too, people like me who've made mistakes and need someone to believe in them." I smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, I was thinking I could volunteer at the youth center downtown, maybe work with some of the kids who are heading down the same path I was on. I know what it's like to feel like nobody cares about you, and I know how much difference one person can make." "I think that's a wonderful idea, Tommy. In fact, I'd like to help." "Really? How?" "I could volunteer too. I have plenty of time on my hands, and I've always believed that young people just need someone to listen to them and take them seriously." Tommy's face lit up with enthusiasm. "We could be a team. You could help with homework and life skills, and I could work with the kids who are already getting into trouble with the law." "Partners," I agreed, extending my hand for a shake. As Tommy shook my hand, I reflected on how drastically my life had changed in just a few weeks. The terrifying experience in the woods had led to the end of Derek's marriage to Sarah, but it had also brought Tommy back into my life and given both of us a sense of purpose we had been lacking. The legal proceedings continued for several more months. Derek eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. His gambling debts were resolved through the liquidation of his assets, though the dangerous people he had been involved with made it clear that he would not be welcome in their circles upon his release. Vincent Caruso and Marcus Webb received shorter sentences in exchange for their cooperation with authorities. Their testimony led to the arrest of several other individuals involved in various criminal enterprises, breaking up a network that had been operating in the area for years. Tommy and I began our volunteer work at the youth center in November, just as the weather was turning cold. The center served teenagers from troubled backgrounds, many of whom had been failed by the traditional education system and social services. Our first day was challenging. The kids were suspicious of us, particularly of me, seeing me as just another well-meaning adult who didn't understand their lives. But Tommy had a natural rapport with them, and his honesty about his own past gradually earned their respect. "I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that everything's going to be okay," he said during our first group session. Life is hard, and it's especially hard when you're starting from behind like most of us are. But I will tell you that you have more choices than you think you do, and every choice you make matters. One of the kids, a 15-year-old named Marcus who had been arrested twice for shoplifting, challenged Tommy immediately. Easy for you to say, old man. You probably grew up in some nice suburban house with parents who cared about you. Tommy laughed, but not unkindly. Actually, Marcus, my mum was a drug addict who forgot to feed me most days, and my dad walked out when I was 8. I spent most of my teenage years stealing food and sleeping in abandoned buildings. Marcus looked skeptical. Then how did you end up working with some rich old lady? I spoke up before Tommy could answer. First of all, I'm not rich. And second, Tommy ended up working with me because he made a choice to help someone who needed it, even though it would have been easier and safer to walk away. Over the following weeks, Tommy and I developed a rhythm with the kids. He would share stories from his own troubled youth, while I provided practical help with homework and life skills. We worked with them on job applications, taught them how to balance checkbooks, and helped them navigate the social services system. One of our most rewarding success stories was a 17-year-old girl named Amanda, who had been living on the streets since aging out of the foster care system. She was intelligent and articulate, but had fallen in with a crowd that was leading her toward prostitution and drug addiction. Tommy and I worked with Amanda for months, helping her get her GED and apply for community college. I used my connections in the community to find her a part-time job at a local bookstore, and Tommy helped her find safe housing in a transitional program for young adults. Why are you doing this for me? Amanda asked one day as we reviewed her college application essays. Because someone needs to, I replied, and because I believe you have the potential to do great things with your life. But what if I mess up? What if I fall back into my old habits? Then we'll help you get back on track, Tommy said. That's what people do for each other when they care. Amanda did mess up a few times. She missed work, skipped classes, and occasionally reverted to some of her old behaviors. But each time, Tommy and I were there to help her refocus and get back on course. Eventually, she stabilized and began to thrive. By the spring, Amanda had been accepted to the community college with a partial scholarship. At her graduation ceremony from the Youth Center's program, she gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. 6 months ago, I thought I was going to end up dead or in prison before I turned 20, she said. But Mrs. Thompson and Tommy showed me that I had other options. More importantly, they showed me that I was worth saving. After the ceremony, Sarah came up to me with tears in her own eyes. "Mum, I'm so proud of what you're doing here," she said. "These kids are lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I replied. "They've given me a sense of purpose I didn't even know I was missing." Sarah had indeed taken the promotion at the hospital and was flourishing in her new role. She had moved into a small apartment near the medical center and was building a new life for herself. The divorce from Derek had been finalized without any major complications, and she seemed happier and more confident than I had seen her in years. "I have some news," Sarah said as we walked to our cars after the ceremony. "Good news, I hope?" "Very good news. I've been seeing someone." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Tell me about him." "His name is David, and he's a teacher at the elementary school near the hospital. We met when one of his students was admitted to the pediatric ward with a broken arm." "What's he like?" Sarah's face lit up in a way that I hadn't seen since the early days of her relationship with Derek. "He's kind, Mom. Really, genuinely kind. He volunteers at a literacy program for adults, and he coaches Little League Baseball in his spare time. He's nothing like Derek." "When do I get to meet him?" I asked. "Actually, I was hoping you'd be free for dinner this Sunday. David has been asking about you ever since I told him what happened with Derek and Tommy." That Sunday dinner was the first of many. David turned out to be exactly what Sarah had described. A genuinely good man who treated her with respect and affection. He was also fascinated by the volunteer work Tommy and I were doing and asked thoughtful questions about the challenges facing at-risk youth. "Have you ever considered expanding your program?" he asked during one of our conversations. There are a lot of kids in the elementary schools who could benefit from early intervention. What do you mean? Tommy asked. I see kids every day who are showing signs of the kind of problems that lead to the situations you're dealing with at the youth center. Kids who are chronically absent, who come to school hungry or dirty, who don't have anyone helping them with homework. If we could reach them earlier, maybe we could prevent some of them from ending up in the juvenile justice system. David's suggestion led to a new phase of our volunteer work. We began working with the school district to identify elementary-aged children who were at risk and to provide them with additional support and resources. I found myself particularly drawn to a third-grade class in one of the most economically disadvantaged schools in the district. The teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation to the detective, was a dedicated educator who was struggling to meet the needs of her students with limited resources. Most of these kids go home to empty houses, she explained during my first visit to her classroom. Their parents work multiple jobs just to pay rent, so there's no one to help with homework or make sure they're eating properly. I began coming to the classroom twice a week to work with small groups of students on reading and basic math skills. Tommy would visit once a week to talk to the kids about making good choices and staying out of trouble. One of the students who particularly captured my attention was an 8-year-old boy named Miguel. He was bright and curious, but often seemed distracted and tired. His clothes were usually wrinkled and too small, and he frequently fell asleep during class. After working with Miguel for several weeks, I learned that his mother was working 3 jobs to support him and his younger sister. She left for her first job at 5 a.m. and didn't return home until after 10 p.m., leaving Miguel to get himself and his sister ready for school and to supervise her after school. I spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez about Miguel's situation, and she connected me with the school's social worker. Together, we were able to arrange for the children to participate in the school's breakfast program and after-school care, which provided them with meals and homework help. But I wanted to do more. I arranged to meet with Miguel's mother, Maria, at her apartment one evening after she returned from work. She was a young woman, probably no more than 25, with tired eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard physical labor. I know Miguel has been having problems at school, she said in heavily accented English, her voice thick with exhaustion and worry. I try to help him, but I don't get home until he's supposed to be sleeping. You're doing the best you can, I assured her. Raising 2 children on your own while working multiple jobs is incredibly difficult. I want them to have better lives than me, Maria said, tears forming in her eyes. I want them to finish school, maybe go to college. But I don't know how to help them when I'm never here. I made a decision that would change all of our lives. What if Miguel and his sister came to my house after school? I could help them with their homework, give them dinner, and you could pick them up when you get off work. Maria stared at me in amazement. Senora, I cannot pay you for that. I barely have enough for rent and food. I'm not asking for payment, I replied. I'm offering because I want to help and because I believe your children deserve every opportunity to succeed. The arrangement worked beautifully. Miguel and his sister Isabella would walk to my house after school, where Tommy and I would help them with homework, provide them with healthy snacks and dinner, and engage them in educational activities. Maria would pick them up around 10:30 p.m., and the children would be ready for bed with their homework completed and their stomachs full. Miguel's grades improved dramatically, and Isabella, who was in 1st grade, began reading at a level well above her peers. More importantly, both children seemed happier and more confident. The success with Miguel's family led other parents in the neighborhood to ask for similar help. Within 6 months, Tommy and I were providing after-school care for 8 children from 5 different families. Sarah, who had been watching our efforts with admiration, suggested that we formalize our program. You should start a non-profit organization, she said during one of our Sunday dinners. That way, you could apply for grants and get more resources to help even more families. The idea seemed overwhelming at first, but David offered to help with the paperwork and legal requirements. His background in education and his connections in the community proved invaluable as we navigated the process of establishing our organization. We decided to call it Second Chances, reflecting both Tommy's journey from criminal to mentor and the opportunities we were trying to provide to at-risk children and families. The paperwork took months to complete, but by the end of the year, we had received our non-profit status and our first small grant from a local foundation. The money allowed us to rent a small building near the elementary school and to hire 2 part-time staff members to help with the growing number of children in our program. One of our new staff members was Amanda, the young woman we had worked with at the youth center. She had completed her first year of community college with excellent grades and was studying child development with the goal of becoming a teacher herself. "I want to be for these kids what you and Tommy were for me," she told me during her job interview. "I want to show them that their current circumstances don't have to define their futures." Amanda brought a unique perspective to our work. Having aged out of the foster care system herself, she understood the challenges facing children from unstable homes in ways that Tommy and I could only imagine. She was particularly effective at working with the older children who were beginning to exhibit behavioral problems. Our second year of operation brought new challenges and new successes. We received a larger grant that allowed us to expand our programming to include family counseling services and adult education classes. Maria, Miguel's mother, was one of the first to enroll in our English language classes, and she eventually was able to quit one of her 3 jobs because her improved English skills qualified her for a better paying position. But our most significant challenge came when the city announced plans to demolish our building as part of a redevelopment project. We had 60 days to find a new location or shut down our program. The news was devastating. We had invested so much time and energy into creating a safe, welcoming space for the children and families we served. The thought of losing it all seemed unbearable. But the community rallied around us in ways that restored my faith in human nature. Parents organized fundraising events, local businesses donated money and services, and even the city council members who had initially supported the redevelopment project began advocating for our cause. The breakthrough came when David mentioned our situation to a colleague at the school district. It turned out that the district owned an old elementary school building that had been closed due to declining enrollment. The building was larger than our current space and in better condition, but it needed significant renovations to bring it up to code for our purposes. The negotiations with the school district took weeks, but eventually we reached an agreement that allowed us to lease the building for a nominal fee in exchange for maintaining it and using it for community programming. The renovation project became a community effort. Local contractors donated labor, businesses provided materials at cost, and volunteers showed up every weekend to help with painting, cleaning, and minor construction work. Even some of the teenagers from the youth center participated, seeing it as an opportunity to give back to the program that had helped them. Tommy proved to have unexpected skills as a project manager, coordinating the various volunteers and contractors to ensure that the work was completed safely and efficiently. His transformation from petty criminal to community leader was remarkable to witness. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," he told me one evening as we surveyed the progress on the renovation. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in shelters and stealing food. Now, I'm helping to build something that will outlast both of us. "You built this with your choices," I reminded him. "Every day you chose to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. This is what happens when someone commits to becoming the person they want to be." The new facility opened on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after that terrifying day in the woods when Derek had tried to coerce me into changing my will. The irony was not lost on me that Derek's criminal scheme had inadvertently led to the creation of something that would benefit hundreds of children and families. Sarah and David were married that same month in a small ceremony in my backyard. It was a simple, joyful celebration that perfectly reflected their relationship. Sarah wore her grandmother's wedding dress, which I had preserved in my closet for decades, and David's students served as ring bearers and flower girls. During the reception, Sarah pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Mum, I want you to know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished," she said, "when I think about how different things could have been if Derek's plan had worked." "But it didn't work," I interrupted. "And even if it had, even if the worst had happened, you would have found a way to build a good life for yourself. You're stronger than you know." "I learned that strength from watching you," Sarah replied. "You could have let what happened make you bitter and fearful. Instead, you used it as motivation to help other people." "I had help," I said, glancing over at Tommy, who was teaching some of the younger guests how to dance. "We all need people who believe in us, who see our potential, even when we can't see it ourselves." The success of Second Chances attracted attention from beyond our local community. We received inquiries from other cities interested in replicating our model, and I was invited to speak at conferences about community-based intervention programs. But for me, the real measure of our success was not in awards or recognition, but in the individual stories of the children and families we served. Miguel, now in 6th grade, was an honor student who talked about becoming a doctor. His sister, Isabella, was reading at a high school level and had developed a passion for creative writing. Amanda had completed her associate's degree and transferred to a 4-year university to finish her bachelor's in education. She continued to work part-time at Second Chances while pursuing her studies, and we all knew that she would be an exceptional teacher. Tommy had earned his high school equivalency and had begun taking college courses in social work. His goal was to become a licensed counselor specializing in addiction and criminal justice issues. "I want to work with people who are where I was 10 years ago," he explained. "People who think they're beyond help, who believe that their past mistakes define their entire future." One of our most challenging cases involved a 14-year-old named Carlos, who had been arrested for selling drugs. His father was in prison, and his mother was struggling with addiction issues of her own. Carlos had been supporting his younger siblings through his illegal activities, and he was resistant to our efforts to redirect his life. "You don't understand," he told Tommy during one of their sessions. "My family needs money now, not in 5 years when I finish high school. These kids you're trying to save, they don't have responsibilities like I do." Tommy nodded sympathetically. "You're right. I don't understand everything about your situation, but I do understand what it's like to feel like you don't have any good choices. So what am I supposed to do? Let my little brothers go hungry while I sit in school learning about algebra?" "No," Tommy replied. "You're supposed to let us help you find better solutions. There are programs that can provide assistance for your family while you focus on your education. There are part-time jobs that pay almost as much as selling drugs, but don't carry the risk of prison or death." It took months of patient work, but eventually Carlos began to trust us. We helped his family apply for assistance programs, found his mother a spot in a treatment program, and got Carlos a part-time job at a local auto repair shop where he could learn valuable skills while earning legitimate income. Carlos's transformation was not immediate or easy. He struggled with the temptation to return to his old life, especially when his family faced financial crises. But each time he faced that temptation, he had a support system in place to help him make better choices. By his senior year of high school, Carlos had become one of our most effective peer mentors, working with younger children who were facing similar pressures. His authenticity and credibility with at-risk youth made him an invaluable member of our team. "Carlos understands these kids in ways that I never could," Amanda told me during one of our staff meetings. "When he tells them that there are alternatives to the street life, they listen because they know he's lived it." As Second Chances approached its 5th anniversary, I found myself reflecting on all the changes that had occurred since that frightening day in the woods. Derek had been released from prison after serving his full sentence and had moved to another state, apparently determined to start over with a new identity. Sarah and David had bought a house and were expecting their first child. Tommy had completed his bachelor's degree and was working toward his master's in social work while serving as the assistant director of Second Chances. Most importantly, we had served over 300 children and their families, providing educational support, mentorship, and hope to some of the most vulnerable members of our community. The success of our program had not gone unnoticed by the criminal justice system. The local police department reported a significant decrease in juvenile crime in the neighborhoods where we operated, and several judges had begun referring young offenders to our programs as an alternative to detention. Detective Rodriguez, who had investigated Derek's case years earlier, became one of our strongest supporters and advocates. "What you've created here goes beyond just helping individual kids," she told me during a visit to our facility. "You've changed the entire culture of this community. Kids who might have seen crime as their only option now see education and legitimate work as viable paths to success." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. I received a letter in the mail one day with a return address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I found a handwritten note from Derek. "Mrs. Thompson," it read, "I know I have no right to contact you after what I put you through, but I wanted you to know that I've been following the news about your organization. What you've built from the wreckage of my mistakes is extraordinary. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for the harm I caused, and I hope that someday I might be able to contribute to something as meaningful as what you've created. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledgement that some good came from something terrible." I showed the letter to Tommy and Sarah, and we discussed whether I should respond. Ultimately, I decided to write back, not to offer forgiveness, but to acknowledge his efforts at redemption and to encourage him to continue working toward positive change. "Redemption is possible for everyone," I wrote, "but it requires consistent action over time, not just good intentions. The work you're doing to rebuild your life matters, not just for you, but for everyone who might benefit from the person you're becoming." As I prepared to celebrate my 78th birthday, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turns my life had taken. The terrifying experience that could have broken me had instead led to the most meaningful and rewarding period of my life. Tommy, now 35 and married to a wonderful woman named Elena, who shared his passion for social justice, had become like a son to me. Sarah and David's daughter Emily was a bright and curious 2-year-old who loved spending time at Second Chances, playing with the children and absorbing the multicultural environment. During my birthday celebration, which was held at the Second Chances facility and attended by dozens of the families we had served over the years, I was asked to give a speech reflecting on the past 5 years. "When I was young," I began, "I thought that a person's legacy was determined by what they accumulated during their lifetime. Money, property, achievements that could be measured and counted. But I've learned that true legacy is not about what you acquire, but about what you give away." I looked out at the audience, seeing faces that represented so many success stories, so many lives that had been changed for the better. Every person in this room has contributed to something larger than themselves. You've proven that when people come together with shared values and common purpose, they can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles and create lasting change. Miguel, now a sophomore in high school and our youngest volunteer mentor, raised his hand. "Mrs. Thompson, what advice would you give to young people who want to make a difference but don't know where to start?" I smiled at the boy who had once fallen asleep in class from exhaustion and was now thriving academically and personally. "Start where you are, with what you have and with who you know. You don't need to have all the answers or all the resources. You just need to care enough to take the first step, and then the next step, and then the next." "Oh, but what if you make mistakes?" asked Isabella, Miguel's sister, who was now in middle school and already talking about becoming a lawyer. You will make mistakes, I assured her. Everyone does. The question is not whether you'll make mistakes, but whether you'll learn from them and use them to become better. Tommy stood up from the back of the room. Mrs. Thompson taught me that our worst moments don't have to define us, he said. They can become the foundation for our best moments, if we're willing to do the work of changing. As the celebration continued around me, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this point. Derek's desperate scheme to force me to change my will had failed completely, but it had set in motion a chain of events that had changed dozens of lives for the better. The will that Derek had been so concerned about had indeed been changed, but not in the way he had intended. Instead of leaving my estate to animal shelters, I had established the Margaret Thompson Foundation, with the mission of supporting community-based programs that serve at-risk children and families. Tommy had been named as the executive director, ensuring that the work we had started together would continue long after I was gone. Sarah and David had been named as trustees of the foundation, along with several community leaders who shared our vision. The foundation would not only continue funding second chances, but would also support similar programs in other communities. As the evening wound down and families began to head home, I found myself standing in the main room of our facility, surrounded by artwork created by the children, photographs documenting our various programs, and thank you letters from families whose lives had been touched by our work. Tommy approached me, carrying Emily, who had fallen asleep during the festivities. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly. "I was thinking about choices," I replied, "how every choice we make creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see or imagine." "The butterfly effect," Tommy said. "Small changes leading to big consequences." Exactly. If Derek had made different choices 5 years ago, none of this would exist. If you had made different choices that day in the woods, we might never have reconnected. If I had chosen to be bitter and fearful instead of hopeful and determined, hundreds of children would have missed opportunities they desperately needed. Tommy shifted Emily to his other arm and looked around the room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently that day?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I try not to dwell on alternate possibilities. I prefer to focus on the reality we've created together." "And what a reality it is," Tommy said with a smile. As we locked up the building and prepared to go home, I reflected on the unexpected gift that had emerged from one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. I had learned that redemption was possible at any age and under any circumstances. Most importantly, I had learned that the best way to heal from trauma was to use that experience to help others avoid or overcome similar challenges. The drive home was peaceful, with the warm glow of streetlights illuminating the familiar neighborhoods where so many of our families lived. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that Tommy had left the porch light on for me, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the care and consideration that had come to characterize our relationship. Inside the house, I found a card on my kitchen table from Sarah and David, thanking me for the wonderful birthday celebration and expressing their love and admiration. There was also a drawing from Emily, a colorful crayon masterpiece that depicted our family as stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the conversation I had had with Miguel earlier in the evening. He had told me about his plans to attend medical school and his dream of returning to our community as a pediatrician. "I want to make sure that kids like me and Isabella have access to good health care," he had said. "I want to be the kind of doctor who understands what it's like to grow up poor and scared." His ambition was remarkable, but even more remarkable was his commitment to using his future success to benefit others. He had internalized the lessons about service and community responsibility that we tried to model in all of our programming. Before turning off the lights, I walked over to my desk and pulled out a notebook where I had been recording thoughts and observations about our work at Second Chances. I wanted to capture some of the insights from the evening's celebration while they were still fresh in my mind. Legacy is not what we leave behind, I wrote, but what we pass forward. It is not about the monuments we build to ourselves, but about the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. The greatest inheritance we can give to the next generation is not money or property, but hope, opportunity, and the knowledge that they have the power to shape their own destinies. I closed the notebook and headed upstairs to bed, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference, and I was eager to meet them. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the children who were at that moment dreaming their own dreams, some of them in the very families we had been privileged to serve. I hoped that our work had expanded their sense of what was possible, that they would grow up believing in their own potential and committed to using their talents to benefit others. The last conscious thought I had before sleep took hold was about Derek's letter and his efforts at redemption. I found myself hoping that he would find a way to channel his own experiences into something positive, that he too might discover the healing power of service to others. In the end, that day in the woods had taught us all that our worst moments can become the seeds of our greatest triumphs, if we have the courage to plant them in soil rich with hope, water them with hard work, and tend them with love.